Welcome to the MicroMD EMR Prescription and Prescription Request Training Session. Whether you are a physician writing a brand new prescription for a patient or a nurse requesting a prescription refill for a patient, the system provides just what you need, where you need it, for recording the patient's medication needs. During this training session, we will cover how to work with the prescription pad and prescription requests windows, handle prescription requests, whether they're internal requests or from an outside pharmacy, use the prescription processor window to write, print, or process a prescription through SureScripts, generate a provider prescription history report, and view unidentified prescriptions. First, let's take a look at the different prescription functions that can be set up in the EMR Manager. So, in the EMR Manager, under Users and Facilities, I'm going to go ahead and choose our user, Betty Lopez. And under the Roles tab, we're going to go to Edit. And under Additional Functions, the three different functions that relate to prescriptions are Write Prescriptions, Write Prescriptions on Behalf, and Authorize Refill Requests. The Write Prescription function allows you to provide any staff member with the appropriate licenses the ability to write prescriptions. The Write Prescriptions on Behalf. This function allows you to provide staff members the ability to write prescriptions on behalf of a prescribing provider, but does not allow them to write prescriptions on their own. Authorize Refill Request. This user function allows a user to process the list of refill requests for any physician. Keep in mind that if a user has the ability to write prescription, you don't have to give them the authorized refill requests in order for them to process their prescriptions. The Write Prescriptions will allow them to do everything that they need to do. One more item under the functions is the Unidentified Items, where you'll find unidentified RX requests. This could be for any external requests that are coming in from an outside source, so from an outside pharmacy, and the system cannot identify the patient for whatever reason. This function should be given to users who can monitor this throughout the day. Now let's go into the EMR. And I'm logged in as Betty Lopez. She's our nurse. In the EMR Manager, Betty is set up with the additional functions of Write on Behalf of and Authorize Refill Requests. When a user, such as a medical assistant or nurse, has the ability to write on behalf of, next to the little RX icon in the toolbar, they would have this little drop-down arrow where they can then access the prescription pad. So you can see if I click on New RX, it brings me the prescription pad. And if I go to New Request, I get the prescription pad request. Also, if the user has the ability to authorize refill requests, in the filters they'll have the additional user filter where they can access the names of all the providers who prescribe within the practice. That way they can see if that provider has any refill requests coming in, whether from an outside pharmacy, we have Walgreens here, or from an internal source. So we can see that our medical assistant sent some refill requests to the doctor. A user can access the prescription pad or the request from the desktop tools if they have it in here. So I added prescription request by going to the little gear tool, making sure it's in the selected items, or from the prescriptions under the desktop navigator, where a user will either have new request or a provider who can prescribe medications will have new RX. We're going to go ahead and first start with the new request. request are very similar. I'm going to point out the few differences that there are as we go through here. The top section is called the prescription header. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to my search reference book and bring up our patient. Once the patient is added, it also loads demographic information, such as the patient's date of birth, their age, gender, and weight, the patient's phone number, the date that the prescription or the prescription request was created along with the time, the patient's last visit, next appointment, and if I click on the link, it brings me to the viewer to see all their upcoming appointments. The provider, so if this is not the correct provider, a user can simply go to the drop-down if they have providers in their common list, or to the search reference book. They can mark the prescription as urgent if necessary. Next, they're going to choose the patient's pharmacy. If a patient has already had a prescription prescribed out of the EMR prior, the pharmacy that was used prior would also load in this drop-down. Also, if in the patient's demographics in their chart, pharmacies have been added, those will also display in the drop-down. If no pharmacy displays, you would go to the search reference book and look up the pharmacy either by putting in the zip code or the pharmacy's phone number and inserting that pharmacy. And finally, in the header, the prescription comment. This area only displays when you have the prescription pad request open. On the prescription pad, there is no comments area. The comments are meant to be viewed by the provider who receives this request. You also have the little QT for quick text and the date and time stamp for the user. The left side of the prescription pad displays the medication reference list viewer. The common button will list the user's medication common list. So this is Betty's medication common list that's displayed. The index button will allow the user to search for medications by system. So if I'm looking for something in the cardiovascular system, now it narrows it down a little bit more, and then I can say vasoactive drugs. You can see that it kind of drills down until I find what I'm looking for. The Smart button allows for several different search options. The patient's current medications, upcoming refills, past medications. If there is a practice preferred medication list that's created in the EMR Manager for things like the formulary or the $4 medications that a lot of pharmacies might prescribe, they can add those to the practice preferred medications, which would then be another search option in this area. Stock medications. These are any medications that have been listed in the stock management module. Potentially suitable medications based on an assessment, along with these other search options. So I can look for a generic or ingredient set or contains a certain ingredient. The All list lists all the medications in the reference database. The medications are color-coded, so the blue simply mean they're over-the-counter medications. The green are generic medications. And if I scroll down here and I find the black ones, those are going to be your name brand medications. Next, we have the icons. The first one is the information bubble. This allows a user to search for drug information, patient educational material for the drug indicated, or view warnings for the patient. It also allows the user to do an internet search regarding the medication. Next, we have the little pill. If the little pill is red, it would indicate that the eligibility is not updated. So if this pill were red, there would be a fourth item under here that says update eligibility. So you would want to click on that first so that it goes out and updates, and then the pill would turn green. The first item in this list, the Eligibility Benefits Manager, shows the prescription eligibility for the patient. The next item is just a formulary legend. So you can see what the icons would mean, whether it's on formulary, off formulary, not covered, or if it's unknown if the medication is covered or not. And next is the RX Hub medications. If the patient's insurance contracts with RX Hub, any medications for the patient that have gone through the patient's insurance would show up on this list. From here you have the options of adding the medications to the patient's long-term medication list or the other medication list. Also, if you click on the little plus sign, it expands out the details and shows each time that this particular medication has been dispensed. The PDR button is a tool and helpful resource for writing prescriptions. It provides informational resources that can help you improve patient care. The new button, this allows you to add a new medication for any user who has the function of add reference data. Keep in mind that if you do add a new medication, the EMR will be unable to perform any cross-checking with the new medication regarding drug and allergy interactions when you prescribe this medication. And the last button is to add or delete a medication to or from the common list. This is a quick way for a provider to build his or her common list of medications in the EMR. In the bottom left corner of the screen, you can verify the patient's allergies. So any allergies that have been listed in the patient's chart, medication allergies, would be listed in this box. Now let's move it over into the right-hand side of the screen, to the medication list. So this is where you're going to pull over the medications that you want to prescribe today for this patient. So I'm going to go over here into my reference list and find the medication I want to prescribe. So I'm going to do Prilosec 20 milligrams, and you can either drag and drop it or double click on the medication. You can pull over as many medications as you need to prescribe all at once. You don't need to do a prescription for each individual medication. So let's go back over here, and I'm going to go to the current medications, and I'm going to pull over the lisinopril also. Then you want to work your list to make sure that all the details for that prescription for each medication in the list are filled in. The red X would allow you to delete the medication from this list, and the LT button with the drop down would allow you to add a medication to the patient's long-term meds, edit the long-term medication list, or edit the other list. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my dosage. So maybe we're going to do 1 tablet, 1 time a day. We'll say take in the evening before bed. You can also access your QT for quick text, and the drop down here allows you to do the date and time stamp or access your quick texts that are added to your common list. The little 1x3 button takes you out to your dosage manager, and for more information on how to use the dosage manager, there is another tutorial that has been recorded for this purpose. So I'm going to continue on here, and we're going to say we're going to give it to the patient for 30 days. Once I put in my duration, you can see that it also gives you the start date and the end date. The dispense quantity. So we're going to give 30 tablets, and we're going to allow 11 refills. On the prescription pad, you can either use the drop-downs or the other instructions, or a combination of both like I just did. So you don't have to use the drop-downs. For something like a steroid tapering dose or a Z-Pak, you won't be able to use the drop-downs, so you would want to just put those instructions in the other instructions box. If needed, you can add the associated diagnosis here by going to the search reference book. And the comments down here is for the pharmacist. So if you put a comment in here, the pharmacy will see those comments. You also have the quick text and the date and time stamp in this area also. Now, if I want to add this Prilosec to the long-term medications, I'm going to go ahead and click on the LT and say Add to Long-Term Meds. And you can see that it pulls all the information that was in that prescription into the long-term medication now. So I'm going to click OK, and that medication is now also listed in the chart as a long-term medication. I'm going to now move on to my next medication, the lisinopril, and I'm going to double check to verify that all my information is in here. So I have 1 tablet, 1 time a day, and I'm going to give it for a duration of 30 days. It's going to calculate my dispense quantity, and I'm going to give 11 refills for this medication also. Once I have verified that all the details have been filled out for all my medications in the list, I can now submit the request. So remember, I'm on the prescription pad request, so this is going to the provider as a request. Now let's log in as our provider. So we're going to go in as Dr. Primary. And on his desktop, under prescriptions, we can see any requests that have come in. So the one we just did as the nurse, Betty, it's now on Dr. Primary's desktop as a request that he now needs to process. These are internal requests because they either came from the medical assistant or the nurse. But if you had any outside requests from a pharmacy, so maybe Walgreens sends a request for a patient, those would also be listed in this area. And the provider can process those in the same way as he would process an internal request. So we're going to choose the one that we just did from Betty. We're going to click on the Action button, Process RX, which brings us to the prescription pad. So looking at it, the prescription pad looks very similar to the prescription request. Being this came over as a request, there is the comments area. So if Betty had put a comment in here, it would be viewed by the provider at this point. I can see that the medications that are requested are listed here. So Betty sent over a request for Prilosec and lisinopril. The provider can then choose from the requested drop-down to approve it or deny the medication. If they deny the medication, they must choose from this menu the reason why. So whether the refill is not appropriate or maybe the patient needs an appointment, if a provider is denying a medication, they do need to choose why they're denying it. I'm going to go ahead and approve the Prilosec. And then we have the lisinopril. So looking at the lisinopril, I don't know if it's covered under the patient's insurance because it has a little question mark. But I can see that there are alternative medications that are covered. So maybe I want to change this medication. I'm going to go ahead and say I want the Lotenzin instead of the lisinopril. So the formulary details will pop up for the provider to see if there are any alternative suggestions. I'm going to click on Lotenzin. It'll ask me if I want to delete the lisinopril. I'm going to say yes. It'll bring up any other drug warnings. And now I have Latensin in here instead of my lisinopril. So simply by clicking on the medication in the alternatives list, I was able to replace the medication in the patient's medication list on the prescription pad. I'm going to go ahead, and this works just the same way as the request. All the fields are the same. And then the duration. I always want to put a duration in, which gives me the start and end date. And then I'm going to allow for 11 refills. Also, don't forget that if you did have a formula in the dosage manager for the medication, you could add it from here. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on the Authorize Prescription button, which brings me to the prescription processor screen. Both of my medications are listed here, and I can choose to write the prescription. So if I hand wrote a script and gave it to the patient, I can say written, but what this will do is document in the patient's chart that it was given to the patient. I could also choose to print the script, or I can send it directly to the pharmacy. I have the ability at this point also to change the pharmacy if necessary. If I want to process just one of the scripts, I can uncheck one and process. Maybe I'm going to send the Latensin to the Rexall, and it'll show that it was processed electronically here. If I chose to write the prescription, it would say written. So whatever route this script was processed, it'll show up here. Now I'm going to uncheck the Latensin, and we're going to say the Prilosec. I'm going to go to the search book, and maybe this one is a mail order, so I'm going to go to Medco, and the Prilosec is going to go to Medco, so I'm going to go ahead and send. So even if you have multiple scripts, they can be processed in different manners. So if there's a scheduled drug that needs to be written or faxed, you can process that from the screen first, and then you can check on the other scripts and send them electronically. The last option to assign to staff would simply allow you to assign it to one of your staff members to either print, fax, or phone in. I also have access to the eligibility from this area, so I can see the Benefits Manager or RxHub Meds. I have the Deselect All or Select All button. Edit allows me to go back into the prescription pad, so if I needed to make an adjustment, I can still do so. And then finally, once I'm done processing, I can just click on the Finish button. It also removes that request from the list because it's been taken care of. Back on the desktop, let's just take a look at a few additional items. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you have your action buttons. Of course, New Rx or New Request is going to bring you to either the prescription pad or the prescription pad request. Process Rx is going to allow you to process your scripts. Mark as done will only be highlighted if there's an item sent to you for action. So if a provider sent to a nurse or MA an item that needs to be either phoned in or faxed into the pharmacy, that would appear on their list as an action item. And once they take care of that item, they can mark it as done from here. Forward would allow a provider to forward the script on to another provider. So let's say I have this one and I need to forward it on to a different provider. I can just simply forward and it sends that on to that different provider. Delete would allow a user to delete an item from this list. Open chart is going to open the chart of the patient that's highlighted in the list. Rx history will just simply show you the history of that request. Print list will allow the user to print this list. It's not going to print the prescriptions, only the list. And the Rx event. This is an online adverse drug event reporting tool. By clicking on this link, it's going to bring the user to the Rx event web portal. So it opens a new browser window on top of the EMR. As a side note, I just want to briefly discuss the electronic transmission of scheduled drugs. Many states have regulations regarding the electronic transmission of prescriptions. Controlled substances are heavily regulated. Depending on your state, you may be required to prohibit the electronic transmission of Schedule II and/or Schedule 3 through 5 controlled substances. SureScripts automatically prohibits acceptance of Schedule II medications by policy, and you currently cannot e-prescribe scheduled drugs. For those providers whose states require them to generate and print a history of the prescriptions the individual provider has written, the Provider Prescription Report prints a list of the medications prescribed within the indicated date range. So, under Print, Provider Prescription Report. From this screen, you can choose the date range. So I'm going to choose the start date of January 1st of this year and go through today. I'm going to click Print, and we're just going to preview the report. So this is the report that will print based on that date range. The system will remember the date you printed the report last and will adjust the default date range accordingly. The report is available to any user with a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant role associated with their account. Next, to monitor prescriptions that have been sent and to assure that they are in fact processing, a user who has the administrator role would have the ability to see the administrative panel. So under Administration, Administrative Panel, in the Integration section, you'll find Prescription Monitoring. From here, you can monitor the status of all prescriptions that have been sent from your practice. When a prescription does not transmit electronically after 3 tries, the system automatically switches the prescription to the fax method to make sure the patient doesn't have to wait at the pharmacy because the prescription never arrived. The system will notify a user via either internal mail or email according to the practice's preferences and what was set up in the EMR Manager when the technology has failed, allowing the user to address the issue promptly. And for the last item, I'm going to log in as our nurse. And under the Desktop Navigator, Unidentified Items, because Betty Lopez was given the function to review unidentified items, she has this available on her Desktop Navigator. And under the item type, she can choose RX requests. If there were any prescription requests that came in and couldn't be identified by the system, so whether the pharmacy has the patient's name in a little bit differently than the EMR has it in, or maybe the request was for somebody who's not even a patient at the practice, those unidentified items would be displayed in this area, where the user can then identify either the provider or the patient from the action buttons. With the Reject Request button, if it's a request that should not have reached your practice in the first place, by clicking on the Reject Request button, the system sends a message back to SureScripts with a denial message, and it removes that from the list.